The earth holds memory. In central Nigeria, it comes up red and heavy, stained with iron and clay. Farmers turning their fields sometimes strike something very strange. Not stone, not bone, but a face. Wide eyes, flared nostrils, lips parted as if about to speak. Around 1500 BCE, when much of the world still pressed bronze into shape, the Nok were already pulling iron from the fire. Sparks leaped from their furnaces into the night sky, making one of the earliest iron cultures south of the Sahara. With metal tools, they cut fields through tough soil, tiled millet into ridges, and shaped spears that gave weight to their hunters and warriors in their villages. Smoke curled upwards from needles where clay turned into sculptures that still hold the gaze of anyone who finds them. The Nok are both present and absent. Their figures sit in museum and private collections. Their iron slag litters the soil. Their settlement traces sleep beneath the grass, and yet their story ends in silence. By the time Rome was rising, the Nok had gone, their voices swallowed by time. All that remains are fragments, faces that refuse to erode, fire-blackened furnaces, and the unanswered question, how does a people so advanced, so vibrant, disappear so completely? The land was red, iron-rich, sun-baked, alive with heat. Rivers cut through the hills of central Nigeria, carrying water that gave life to fields of millet and sorghum. The soil was stubborn, but it yielded if you worked it right. Here, the Nok people built their homes, round huts of clay and thatch. Group in circles like families gathered around a fire. Smoke drifted from hearths. Children carried water pots from the streams. Dogs barked at the edge of the field. Life moved in steady rhythm, seasons after season, but under the surface, something waited. Ore, iron ore, hidden in stone. When they learned how to draw it out with fire, everything changed. So picture it, a clay furnace glowing at night, the roar of air from bellows, spark flying into the dark sky, iron dripping from stone, soft at first, then hammered into tools that cut deeper, faster and stronger. A hoe that opened soil like never before, a blade that turned the hunt into certainty. Fire had given them more than warmth, it had given them power. And with power came growth. Villages grew larger, fields stretched wider. Herds of cattle gazed under the sun, their bells ringing across the plain. The Nok were no longer just farmers and herders. They were builders of something greater. Their world was not quiet, it was alive with sound, the crack of woods feeding the furnace, the pounding of hammers on fresh iron, the low song of women grinding grain, the laughter of children chasing each other in the dust. This was a society moving forward, bound together by land, by work, and by the fire that lit their nights. The Nok also carried belief in every task. Before planting seeds, elders spoke to the soil. Before iron was pulled from the furnace, offerings of grain or drink were laid to honor the spirits. Clay figures were placed at thresholds and fields, guardians in human form to watch and protect. The Nok lived close to earth, and every harvest, every spark of fire, every breath of cattle was tied to their sense of balance with the unseen. Travelers who passed through carried news of distant lands. They came with salt, beads and stories, and they left with iron blades, food and cattle. These paths of exchange tied the Nok to a larger world, even if their own villages seemed far from the coast. In time, the red earth itself became a crossroads, where trade, craft and belief turned an ordinary plateau into the heart of something extraordinary. Iron was more than just a tool, it was a turning point. With stone, the earth resisted. With iron, it opened. Nok farmers could clear heavier soil, cut deeper furrows and plant more grain. Fields grew larger, harvest richer, and families stronger. Where once survival was enough, now surpluses filled the clay bins. Surplus meant freedom, the freedom to trade, to build, to imagine. The forges themselves became the heart of the village. At night, furnaces glowed like captured suns. The roar of bellows, worked by steady hands, filled the dark. Spark leaped upwards, bright against the black sky, as if stars were being reborn from the earth. Blacksmiths stood at the center of all, respected, even feared. They were not just maker of tools, they were the keepers of secret. To shape iron from stone was to hold the balance of life and death. A sharper hoe could feed a family, a sharper spear could defend the village. Wealth was no longer only counted in cattle or grain, but also in the strength of the blade, the skill of a farmer, the reach of a hunter. Power shifted and the Nog began to stand apart from those around them. Iron did not stay home. Traders carried Nog blades and tools down winding paths that stretched towards other lands. In return came salt, beads and goods from far-off regions. Exchange was more than material. It was the lifeline of ideas, stories and alliances. Every forged blade that left the village was also a messenger. The Nog were rising, and their reach extended beyond their valleys. Fire and iron gave muscles to the people, but what truly bound them was the belief that these forces were not just practical, they were sacred. Before a furnace was lit, offerings were laid. Before a blade was used, thanks was given. Fire itself was a spirit, and iron was its child. To wield it was to touch something larger than the human hand. The Nog had moved from the survival to the power, from small villages to a culture with reach. And at the center of that transformation stood two things: the glow of the forge and the fire that shaped not only iron but also the destiny of the people. If fire gave the Nog their strength, clay gave them their soul. Across their villages, sculptures crouched low in the dust, with clay weight against their palms. They pinched, pressed and smoothened the earth into form. First the broad shapes, then the features, eyes hollowed wide, nose flared, mouth half parted as if in speech. Some faces carried calm, others held warning. All of them looked alive, as though they were waiting for someone to answer. Hair was carved in ridges and braids, showing style to elaborate. You could almost feel the hour it took to make them. Jewelries, anklet and pattern marks decorate the bodies. Every line told something about the person it represented: status, role, memory. When the clay hardened in the nail, the figure carried more than appearance. It carried identity. These terracotta figures were not meant to sit idle. They stood guard at farm edges. They rested in households as protectors. They were placed in graves as companions for the dead. In some places, they were broken on purpose, shards pushed into the soil, as if returning their spirit to the earth. The Nog did not draw a line between art and life. Each figure was a voice, a prayer and a reminder. Picture a dusk gathering, families around a fire, the sculpted figure placed on a mat, offerings of grain scattered before it. Beer poured onto the ground, the soil drinking with the ancestors. The flames lit the terracotta faces, and shadows made its eyes seem to move. A child whispered to ask if it was alive, and an elderly only smiled, because in a way it was. The Nog sculptures turned clay into memory and memory into presence. Their creations are some of the oldest and most haunting work of art in Africa. Even today, pulled from the soil after centuries of silence, they still hold that same uncanny gaze. They do not erode. They do not soften. They stare as though trying to tell us what was lost. These figures are fragments of belief and fragments of life. Together, they are the Nog's voice, carried across thousands of years. When their forges went cold and their fields fell quiet, the terracotta remained. It is how we know they were here. It is how we know they mattered. No one knows the exact moment when the Nog began to fade. Their decline did not roar like fire. It whispered. Fields that once stretched wider may have grown tired. Centuries of planting could have drained the soil, leaving the harvest thin. Rivers shifted their courses, and droughts darkened the land. Herds of cattle needed more grass than the hill could give. In time of hunger, even iron blades could not coax food from a weary earth. Trade routes, once lively with exchange, began to change as well. New centers rose, new alliances formed, and the Nog's place in the network weakened. The very thing that had given them strength, iron, clay, herds, fields, may have become burden too heavy to carry when the balance broke. There are signs of fire in some sites, not the controlled blaze of a furnace, but the destructive flames of abandonment. Home left charred, furnaces left cold, villages emptied, people likely moved, carrying fragments of their knowledge to a new land, blending into the rise of later cultures. Yet the Nog name itself slipped into silence. By 300 CE, the villages were gone. The forges no longer lit the night. The sculptor's hand no longer pressed clay into faces. Only the red earth remained, hiding fragments beneath its skin. When we look back, the disappearance feels almost impossible. How could a people who mastered iron, who shaped clay into memory, vanished so completely? But sometimes history is not erased by just one disaster. It is worn away by small cuts, by seasons, by change. The Nog left not with a shout, but with a silence. And yet their silence is not empty. Their sculptures still rise from the soil. Their iron slang still marks the earth. They may have disappeared as a people, but their presence endures in fragments, reminding us that cultures can fall quiet, but memory, once fired into clay, does not forget. The Nog disappeared, but their silence was never empty. Every fragment of terracotta pulled from the red earth is more than broken clay. It is a heartbeat. It is a proof that people lived here with a vision, skill, and a memory. Those wide eyes carved so long ago still stare across the centuries, refusing to close, refusing to let us forget. These iron slangs scattered through the soil still marks where furnaces once roared, where hands turned fire into power and power into survival. Civilizations do not end in one single moment. They fade, they shift, they transform. Sometimes they vanish from maps, but never from memory. They leave echoes, ruins, fragments, scars in the land, or faces rising from the earth. The Nog left with faces, faces that still speaks in silence. Faces that carry both the beauty and the burden of a people who wanted to be remembered. What this really means is that the Nog never truly vanished. Their art remains as their voice. Their iron remains as their fire. Their soil remembers their footsteps. Every sculpture is a bridge across time, reminding us that we too are temporary. But what we create can outlive us. Stand before one of their terracotta head and you feel it. The curves of the eyes, the strength of their jaw, the presence of a human who lived and loved, who believed in spirits and ancestors, who planted, hunted, sculpted, and dreamed. They are not strangers, they are reflections. When we look into those hollow eyes, we are not only looking at the Nog, we are looking at ourselves. The Nog's voice is carried not by words, not by chronicles, but by clay hardened in fire. And clay remembers more than the paper ever could. It remembers the hand that shaped it, the breath of the sculpture, the prayer whispered before the knell. It remembers people who mattered. And so, long after their villages felt silent, long after their furnaces went cold, the Nog endured. Their sculptures sit as witnesses watching the world change. Their silence is not a defeat. It is a lesson that all civilizations are fragile. But what we leave behind, our art, our memory, our voice, can speak long after we are gone. The Nog vanished, yet their stories lives. The clay remembers. Thank you for watching CTT Stories, ladies and gentlemen. The Nog may have fallen silent, but their clay speaks louder than any words. If this story stayed with you, share it forward and in the comments write "The clay remembers," a way to honor the hands that shaped these faces from earth and fire. And subscribe for more human stories carved from time. Stay curious, stay human, and remember, some voices never fade. They harden in clay. And I'll see you in the next one.